Welcome in everyone. Today we have a new first look video focused on the new game Land of the Vikings. Now I believe the genre for this is something like strategy and survival. It is a builder game. You can set up your entire village and slowly grow it into a pretty massive city with a lot of freedom, a lot of different buildings, and there's a whole production pipeline for various things that you will need down the road. While being themed Vikings, which is somewhat new, I don't know that I've played a Viking game like this before, I will say it does remind me a lot of Farthest Frontier and Frostpunk. Now, if you haven't heard of Land of the Vikings, then you're in the right spot. This first look series is all about diving into upcoming games or newly released games and really giving it the first look and seeing what our impressions are of the game. If you want to learn more about Land of the Vikings, check the description below for a link to Steam. So if you enjoy the video, be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like and a comment down below with your thoughts. Come check us out at twitch.tv/Slay3k for more variety gaming. But for now, let's dive into Land of the Vikings. Now, my version of Land of the Vikings is the pre-alpha access to the game, so I feel like there's going to be plenty more added to the game. There's a ton of opportunity as well that we'll get into as we progress through the video. First and foremost, you get to select your map, your village name, and then you also get to set up your banner. I'm going to be playing the tutorial mode just to get a better sense of how to go about prepping our Viking city. Although I didn't find the tutorial very intrusive or anything like that in the gameplay experience, which is awesome. You start off with a few buildings already, including carpentry, a few houses, and your town center. Like many other games in the same genre or category, you have the opportunity to tell workers to go ahead and chop wood and begin mining, which I've already done here, as you can see indicated by the markers. It's really important to stay on top of this, as you'd expect, to maintain enough resources to continue expanding your town. Something familiar for a game like this is that you have a lot of your resources listed at the top, including food, stone, wood, amongst other things. You also have your population, fame level, military defense status, and a calendar wheel towards the middle that actually indicates what season you're in, which is significant as you progress through the game. You are focused on building up your population, giving your Vikings various jobs, including carpentry, woodcutter, get into tailoring, then you later have to assign them to training to military. There's a lot of layers to this. And your villagers also have certain stats associated with them that make them better for certain jobs over other jobs. Now, you do have a labor class, which is essentially the folks that are going to run around and do a lot of the mining or wood gathering. One of the next things you need to make sure you have set up is your builders, and they are going to be doing the obvious. They'll be building all your buildings, and it's important to keep several in that role to make sure they can keep up with your expanding village. Now, I spent a few hours playing through part of this game just to see what was all there and set up in this pre-alpha access version. And it's pretty extensive. There's a lot of buildings available, and probably my favorite is a significant amount of decorative items that also can play a role in helping out some of your buildings or maybe the happiness of your villagers. I love that decorative items can have a bigger purpose besides just being aesthetic, so I was really excited to see that. My one question with games like this is always, what are the negative things that can affect your progress? Well, obviously you have things like food. You need to make sure that you're collecting resources in order to continue your expansion, because as one thing fails, then the whole pipeline begins to fail, right? I'm going to do my best to give you guys little glimpses at various points of progress in the build. Again, I played it for several hours and I want to condense that into a shorter video so you guys can get a good idea of what to expect when playing Land of Vikings. Now, what you're witnessing right now is just a basic list of like all the items that you can build. You'll notice that some of them are marked off, and that's because there is a research tree that I started diving into a little bit later. But you can get an early glimpse at how many buildings and items there are to eventually construct. It's pretty expansive. I also love the details in some of the buildings and making them look like they're from the sort of Viking era. I think that's very nice. Everything was aesthetically pleasing. The visuals in the game were lovely. And as I'm showing here all the decorative items, again, these can help buildings, and some of them will increase storage capacity, boost happiness, and even assist in your field's yield as you harvest. Overall, I felt like the game's UI and everything was very comfortable. There's nothing about this game that stood out in a very negative way, which I was really impressed by given that it's a pre-early access version of the game. And that's awesome because sometimes you'll get a build like this and it may have performance issues or something like that, and this didn't have any of that. The attention to detail with the animations was awesome too. And granted, this isn't really a gameplay thing, but it's always cool to have like really good detail, especially when you're zooming in, you're looking at buildings being constructed. It's always nice to see stuff like that. It makes it a little bit more immersive in my opinion. And for the folks that enjoy role management, as I mentioned earlier, you do have to select workers for some of the buildings. Now, each villager does have 4 stats associated with them, and certain stats may apply better to the role that you are selecting them to. So you'll want to investigate that as you're applying certain villagers to certain jobs. I noticed our population grew relatively smoothly at first. through bursts within the village and also newcomers entering our village. You do obviously need to be able to provide housing and also food for everybody to stay happy and fed. I do like that Land of the Vikings does have some tools to be able to manage and see where everybody's working, see the population breakdown, and so on and so forth. That was very nice to see, and I can quickly on the fly adjust where workers are. So if I wanted to shut down certain operations for a while, I can quickly minimize how many workers are there and shift them into the labor category or maybe the builder category. Tree of Life is the research tree system, and there's a bunch of options, including boosting certain stats for your characters like happiness or productivity. It also unlocks several different building options. So for example, we can move up and begin to operate fields and various things associated with food. Right now, I know that my Tree of Life points that I can use to unlock some of these options is based on completing objectives. And as one would expect, as you progress, some of them get more and more expensive, so you want to be careful about how you apply these points. Now, something that I love is this new type of UI that I've seen in a game like Manor Lords, where you can start to set the area that you want to work within. So for example, the fields option here, where you can kind of build it in a unique shape, I think is really cool. It sort of breaks the old monotony of grids that we've used in games in the past and gives you the ability to customize your space the way you want. Because sometimes you play games, right, and you'll have these dead spaces where you can't fit anything within. And now fields, for example, within this game can fill some of those awkward spaces. And of course, I also enjoy the use of having very, very simple pathing systems to create a little network on walkways. And I noticed the villagers quickly react to that and begin to use it very fast. Something else that's nice is the farming system. And again, a lot of the UI is very simple to use. It's very straightforward. You just have to kind of keep track of a few things, but it also will alert you of certain tasks that you need to complete, like harvesting your field. It'll give you an indication that you need to do so. And if you wait too long, you may potentially lose those crops. And of course, you do have to keep track of the seasons, because if you plant too late, those crops can be destroyed at winter. As you might guess, there's several things that you can start to create production pipelines for, like bread, eventually armor, clothing, barley to make beer. There's several areas where you can develop pipelines for, and I didn't find anything overly difficult to understand or figure out. And I say that because I found games recently where it sometimes is a little bit difficult to figure out the exact path or the route you need to go to create the things all the way from the beginning to the end product. Now, for example, if you have a goat ranch, you can then create wool. Wool will go towards the tailor, which will create several different items when you add other items into it, like leather, for example. Also, the weather and everything in the game was actually really pleasant. You get snow, you get rain, there's even thunderstorms, which can actually have a really negative effect on your village because lightning can get wild. Buildings that can help and advance your civilization to the next level a little bit. For instance, you can build buildings like mines and stone pits. Stone pits are important to keep your production of stone up. There is one thing you need to keep an eye on, and that is that workers can die. So you may have workers that pass away, and if you don't replace them, your building will just cease to function. And one thing about the maps is that some of the resources can be placed further away based on the map you pick. And some buildings require that you build them in certain areas. For example, the mine should be built on a stone wall where coal might exist, or iron. And these placement opportunities are rather limited. Now, if you're wondering what are the issues that you might have show up in your village that could prevent you from progressing, there are a few. I noticed a couple earthquakes, a lightning storm, and then these little problematic situations in the village where you needed to build housing to accommodate new villagers or they were going to be mad. This also can play a part in your level of fame, which I assume contributes to some things down the road later. One thing that I was expecting to see that I haven't seen yet in several hours playing was some sort of raid by enemy Vikings. I'm not sure if this is a mechanic that's come into the game, that's built into the game, but in my several hours of playing, I didn't witness it. So I'm not sure. Maybe it's just not in the version I'm playing right now. But there is a defensive rating for your village. So I guess TBD on that report as to whether that's something that's coming to the game, if it's in, and how it operates, if it does come. Now, the other bits of adversity you face, including earthquakes and lightning storms, are pretty destructive. They will break down buildings and they will kill some of your villagers. On the flip side, though, there are some things that can help. For example, your village can put on festivals. Now, the only thing I noticed is there's not really a visual mechanic associated with that. I guess it all happens within your town center, but it does typically give favor to your land, which I think increases yield. This also costs certain resources or things that you make in order to be able to put on in the first place. Now, there are a couple bigger features that come to the game a little bit later in your playthrough that I unfortunately didn't quite get to at the recording of this video. The first thing is trading that goes beyond just the area of your village and with other villages around. Didn't quite get to that mechanic, but I think that is an interesting way to expand the gameplay. The other thing is military raids. You can raid other villages, but I'm not sure how that operates. If it's mission based where you send your guys out and you see how many of them come back with whatever loot they're able to get, but you are able to create your military based on the villagers you have in your city. So essentially you can train them in things like light infantry and archery and get them prepared for battle, but it is dependent on your population. So what are my overall thoughts on Land of the Vikings? Well, aesthetically, it's beautiful. It runs very, very well performance-wise. I really enjoyed my playthrough. Now, I played most of this on 2 speed, sometimes 3 speed, just to try to move quicker so that I could cover more for you guys. What I noticed, though, is it is a slow progression. Now, the one thing I will say, too, and that I kind of want more of is some adversity, some other things to affect my gameplay besides earthquakes, lightning strikes. Raids would be ideal, and I'm not sure how early those can be introduced because you can't quite defend yourself right away. At least not with normal soldiers, but if we could have something where villagers could fight off a few raiders, that might be something to add in. Something else I'm not sure of that maybe I just didn't get to in the Tree of Life research tree is whether or not there's any sort of defensive upgrades to your village, like in terms of maybe a watchtower or some spiked walls or something like that to help defend your position. Not only do I think things like this would add to the value of the gameplay, but it also give it more replayability, because right now I see this as something that you might want to play on each map, but I'm wondering what can continue to add to that experience. Now, I probably didn't make all the best decisions in game, and I know I didn't because I was expanding and just trying things with different buildings just to see what things did or how they operated. But one thing I'll say is if I'm playing at 2 times speed and I'm getting only to a point where I'm just now building the training facility for my military, that's a few hours of gameplay. And while that's nice in terms of the length of play, the only negative is it takes me that long to open up a couple of channels, like for military raids or trading. And during that time of preparing for those things, it just felt like the biggest negative or the biggest thing fighting against me was just time. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, I just wanted more. I wanted more to fight against me. And maybe that comes later in the playthrough. Maybe I just haven't got that far yet, but I would hope by now I'd have some indication of some other things that could affect my progress. And again, this is pre-early access, so there's plenty of things that they can do. I can totally see how DLC or something like that could continue to expand your playthrough and make this a really, really fun opportunity. The game does play smooth. Performance-wise, it's great. Aesthetically, it's beautiful. It's a very good and simple UI. I very much enjoy those things, but I am curious to see what the dev can continue to add to this for variety and to continue to build up the replayability of Land of Vikings. I hope you guys enjoyed this first look, and again, there's a couple things we didn't quite get to in the video, which it's kind of tough. I want to make these bite-sized and very, very approachable for folks to come look at and get a quick dive into a new game, but we have to balance that. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and leave a comment down below with your thoughts, and I'll catch you next time.